shattered truths. In week 52, the little town already shimmered with the anticipation of festivities. Strings of twinkling lights adorned street corners, their glow reflected in the frosted windows of small houses. The air was somehow alive with the scent of candied almonds, cinnamon, and vanilla, sweet bakeries waiting to be shared. Yet amidst this explosion of life and light, Henrik remained unmoved in his own house. Only now did he notice the splinters on the frames of the old windows. It irritated him. How could one have lived in a place for so long and never discover something as provocative as that? 30 years in the same house, married to a woman named Bente. She never had much interest in cleaning like most women her age had. Henrik looked up from the bed where he rested his body in the afternoon. Naps like these started to occur more often than before. Probably age, or hell knows why. The door was open, and he could see the light from the lamp in the kitchen. Very faint, but just enough to see clearly. When was the last time he changed the light bulbs? Or maybe the last time he did that? Maybe 4 years ago? Or 6? Henrik got up and walked around the house for a moment until he saw the old plates. Small teacups were there too. They had gathered dust over time. Why did she even collect them when she didn't even polish them? Wasn't that something you do when you collect all sorts of crap? Henrik took his box with pills and swallowed a handful of them with lukewarm water, and then grabbed his cigarette box. As the flame flickered to life and touched the tip of his cigarette, the first inhale hit him with a rush of warmth, pulling him out of the heavy fog of his sadness. The bittersweet wave of nostalgia washed over him, carrying flashes of his younger years, when the world was a vast, untamed promise, each day unwritten and brimming with possibilities. Now, every movement was deliberate, every breath a reminder of the disease that gripped his body, unraveling him piece by piece. The cigarette trembled in his unsteady fingers, a cruel contrast to the steady, unbroken rhythm of his past, when his hands had been strong and his future limitless. Henrik looked up at the cupboard with the plates. He no longer spared them a glance, knowing they wouldn't remain in his house much longer. The small glass doors of the cupboard did not bother to open. "Come on!" He got angry and used all his strength to open the cupboard until it gave out. Glass bounced and flew all over the place, and a small piece flew into his face. A second later, a small cup fell, adding china to the glass artwork on the ground. "Well," said Henrik, "Bente will take care of that." For a minute, Henrik wondered where she might be. But then a sudden thought struck him. Probably anyone with self-respect would be willing to spend more quality time away from his miserable presence. Carefully, as much as he could, Henrik took the plates and cups and put them down in a cardboard box. He put on his jacket and shoved the keys in the pocket of his leather jacket. It has been a few years since he didn't drive, not that he didn't know how to. So he headed walking, went out to Red Cross shop, and handed the ladies at the counter the filled cardboard box without saying a word. Henrik stepped out into the street and saw that it was beginning to get dark. He gave a sigh of relief, as if that particular china was a burden that added more weight to his heavy enough life. It was past 3 in the afternoon, and the clouds were long and transparent. When was the last time he went out for a walk? Not recently, for sure. It was too unbearable to look at all these energetic people. Energetic enough to laugh and move around, with no rollators, and accompanied by themselves only. Each step now felt like a quiet triumph. The rhythm of his feet against the pavement was a soothing reminder that, despite the tremors and stiffness, Henrik was still moving forward, and this helped to refresh his mind. The crisp air brushed against his face, and for a moment, the simple act of walking became a victory over the weight of his condition. After about 15 minutes, Henrik walked in the dark until he saw a neon sign. He had forgotten his glasses at home, but the word bodega was big enough to read. He entered in the cozy, time-worn charm. Its low beams and dimly lit interior soaked with the stories of decades past. Henrik used to come more often, but the last time he had beer in the bodega was when his son turned 18 and the whole family celebrated. Henrik looked around to choose a spot. Faded photographs and vintage beer ads adorned the smoke-stained walls, while mismatched chairs and well-worn tables lent the space some hyggelig, unpretentious air. A faint aroma of beer mingled with the occasional smell of fried food as locals leaned on the polished but scuffed wood counter, exchanging jokes over clinking glasses. Henrik felt strange. There was only a small group of people, and the whole room smelled of something naggingly recognizable. Henrik sat down next to a lone man. Both were silent. Only their bodies felt close enough to feel each other's hollowness. Jens could hear Kim's "in a little while" playing, and turned to the guy for some small talk. Aren't pleasantries often a way to save ourselves from being engulfed by awkward solitude? The man looked much younger. Henrik saw him drinking from a small porcelain cup, like the ones he just left off earlier. Funny, Henrik thought, and forced his eyes to focus more. He noted he wasn't a man at all. He was a teenage boy, with tears in his eyes. "Are you okay, my boy?" "What's going on?" Henrik asked. The boy didn't answer, but turned around revealing a deep gash reaching from his left shoulder to his lower back. Henrik's eyes widened. The boy stopped smiling, and his somber look turned into a gunter, empty expression. He collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. Henrik noticed that the boy had a guars on the inside of his jacket. He grabbed it abruptly, without anyone noticing. Henrik didn't have his phone with him, so he asked one of the people in the bar to call the police and pointed to the body. When Henrik opened the door, the wind blew in his face. Rain poured in, and the weather was completely different from just a couple of minutes ago. The sky was entirely black, and the sounds of screams were coming from the distance. Henrik was following the wails, not actually sure where he was heading to. He had almost reached home when he saw two individuals in front of his neighbor's house. They looked like thieves, and when he fixed his gaze, he saw they had weapons in their hands and looked dangerous. They were murderers. Henrik stepped back and was about to hide behind a large willow tree when they noticed him. Henrik took the boy's gun and readied to fire. To his surprise, the gun was empty, and he panicked. Henrik could hear his own snorting breath over the wind. He couldn't run. He couldn't hide. So he just sat quietly on the ground, putting the gun down in despair. Henrik saw a red car driving up the dirt road. It stopped so suddenly that it skidded and slid into the nearby ditch. Henrik felt the weight of his decisions and his fractured memories pressing down on him. His life had been a blur of rancor, loneliness, and regret. But now it was ending in chaos while the sirens grew louder and armed men scooted closer. The middle-aged woman who came with the red car, Bente, rushed toward Henrik, screaming at the officers who found an unarmed ill man announced missing. "You're late," Henrik muttered, closing his eyes and lying on the grass. But now it seemed she didn't hear him. He got lost twice last week. Again, without the phone, everything started to fall apart after we lost our young love, uttered Bente through tears while they were lifting Henrik and heading to the ambulance. The two people, his neighbors, helped Bente to collect a few scattered pieces of china, and no one knew why Henrik had a porcelain loop handle around his ring finger. Haunting, Jack couldn't speak. He could only scream as he woke up to the sound of his mother's voice, whispering to him from the corner of his dark bedroom. Of course, it wasn't actually his mother. He knew that. How could it be, when she had died in a car accident just a little over a week earlier? "Jack, come over here, Jack. You can see me, can't you? Come over here, child." His chest was heavy, his bladder loose with fear. Looking over into the corner, as he flailed amidst his perspiration-damp sheets, he realized that he could indeed see something. The same something, in fact, that he had seen on that terrible night of his mum's demise, just minutes after his aunt, who had been babysitting him at the time, had received the phone call that would cause both of their worlds to come crashing down. She had broken the news to him, and he had seen it standing over by the window of his aunt's tiny living room. It had been at the funeral too, and now here it was again, invading the privacy of his bedroom this time, lurking in the corner, watching him, taunting him by speaking with his dead mother's voice. "Jack! Come here, Jack!" Now tears of terror spilled down his cheeks as he scrambled to sit up. His gaze was fixed upon the corner, on the hulking, dark outline of a man who stood there, wide and tall, so tall that its head almost brushed the ceiling. It had no face, no features. It was only visible because somehow it was even blacker than the darkness itself which suffused the room. Blacker than the very night. How could that be? His screams tapered off as his throat constricted. From elsewhere in the house, he could hear the sound of frantic movements. His aunt had clearly been roused by his yells. Her footsteps raced across the landing, old floorboards groaning loudly. "I'll return, Jack. You can't avoid me forever." His mother's voice hissed quietly. The thing then scuttled, spider-like, across to the wall, and then through it, as though no barrier existed at all, as though the laws of physical matter simply did not matter to it one bit. The thing disappeared from his sight just as the bedroom door was flung open and the light snapped on to dazzle him with its bright glare. "Jack, Jack, are you all right?" His Aunt Alice stood there, looking pale and startled. Her resemblance to his mum, as always these days, struck him like a dagger through the heart. They had the same raven hair, just as he did himself, the same ice blue eyes, same sharp cheekbones, same thin lips. His mother's now stilled forever, whilst his aunt's were pinched in a worried frown as she approached the bed where he lay. "Sweetheart, what is it? Did you have a bad dream?" He shook his head. It was bad, all right, but it was no dream. He raised a trembling hand to point over at the corner where the thing had been standing, mocking him by its mimicking of his dead mother's voice as it tried to lure him in. Alice turned to look, but quickly brought her attention back to him. "There's nothing there, Jack. You just had a nightmare, that's all." Her gaze shifted, moving down over his sheets, where a damp stain alerted him also to the fact that he must have wet himself. He cringed, the tears coursing faster down his cold cheeks. What kind of a 12-year-old wet the bed? "It's all right," his aunt soothed. "I'll get those in the wash." and you can come and sleep with me in my bed for the rest of the night. It'll be dawn in a couple of hours anyway." And so saying, she ushered him out of his bed and took his hand to lead him over to her room. As always, it smelled strongly of lavender. After tucking him in, she retreated back to strip the damp sheets from his bed. Meanwhile, he lay there, alone once more in the darkness, eyes wide open and frantically scanning the dark shapes all around him, lest the shadow should return again that night to torment him. All the while, the sound of his aunt's stifled sobs haunted his ears.
Tenta,
"Abi, if you can hear me, please respond. I don't know what to do. He hasn't spoken a word since you died, and he seems so disturbed. He's been having night terrors, and..." Jack crept down the stairs, being careful to avoid the creaking steps. His skin was crawling, body covered in goosebumps, not from the cold, but from a renewed sense of fear. Peering over the banister, he saw his aunt in the living room. She was sitting with her back to him, cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table. On the table itself, right in front of her, was a board. A wooden board with letters and numbers on its surface. The exact same kind of board as he remembered seeing his mother messing around with so many times before. Late in the evenings, after she'd had a bottle of wine. "Abi, are you here with us? Please." Jan. He wanted to run down the remainder of the steps, grab that board, and smash it to pieces, or burn it to ashes. For there was something about it that just seemed so very, very wrong. He was stopped in his tracks, however, by a sudden, sharp gasp from his aunt. She had her fingers resting on top of a small, circular piece of glass, which rested atop the board. And as he watched, the piece of glass slid free of Alice's grip and went spinning away, clearly moving of its own volition. It raced in jagged lines all across the board. Jack felt dizzy at what he was seeing. His legs gave way beneath him as he sank down onto one of the steps, his buttocks slamming painfully hard against the bare wood. Candlelight leapt in the room before him, the multiple flames flickering wildly. A muffled groan rumbled deep in his chest. Alice did not turn around. She was far too intent upon whatever message was being spelled out to hear him. He watched as she snatched up a nearby notebook and pen, scribbling frantically as she noted down what she was seeing reveal itself before her, never taking her eyes off the board. Eventually, the glass fell still. Something stirred in the air. The candle stuttered. His aunt gave a shiver, and Jack watched as the shadow man emerged through the closed door into the kitchen, moving to stand right beside Alice, reaching out with one of its thick arms as though to touch her. Another gust of wind blew through the room, carrying on it the stench of something rotting. Unable to take it anymore, Jack scrambled to his feet and ran back up the stairs. He cowered in his aunt's bed, covers pulled up over his head. As in the room below, he heard her begin to scream. Cotuit circle. Let's keep pretending. I whispered those 3 words with a slight slur, the buzz of 2 champagne cocktails still churning through my veins. The air was thick with that sleepy summertime vibe, bugs buzzing and crickets chirping their seasonal symphony. I tucked a copper-colored curl behind my ear and squeezed Nick's hand tighter as we strolled through the canopied streets, the golden sunlight still warm on our shoulders. At dinner, we had joked about being rich retirees, just stopping for a quick bite before returning to our yacht for a summer soiree. Sweetheart, you can be whoever you want to be, Nick grinned, slowing down his lanky stride to steady my swaying steps. In fact, I have a surprise for you. Follow me. We interlaced our fingers and ascended the hill towards Cotuit Circle. Backed by a ridge of evergreen, the house stood out amongst the newly renovated mansions, its creamy white woodwork and deep sage trim, a charming reflection of timeless architecture. Despite being worn and weathered, the house seemed to boast of its own importance, like a royal battleship returning from war. The setting sunlight sparkled off the towering, tapered windows that flanked each side of the entryway. Fragrant honeysuckle climbed the porch railings in intricate swirls, weaving in, out, and around each delicately carved post. I ran my fingers along the smooth address welded into the bars of the gate. 3, 5, 4. Cotuit Circle. Ka-tuet. I love saying those words, I murmured to myself. Click. Nick opened the gate with a grand flourish. Today, on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, we are touring Gemma Grant's opulent Cotuit Circle home. Champagne wishes and caviar dreams and all that jazz. Nicholas, whose house is this? I fixed a broken pipe here last week. The old lady is gone for the summer. Stop stressing. It's fine. I hesitated. Nick tilted his head in a knowing glance that wordlessly implied, trust me. I exhaled deeply to calm my nerves and stretched my arms overhead. Shit. Ow! I moaned as my thumb caught on a thorn from the crimson, rose-lined trellis. A tiny trickle of red snaked down my wrist. I pressed my thumb to my lips and rolled my eyes. I'm fine, I murmured. Nick kissed my hand and guided me through the gate to the front door. He entered the same code into the panel above the door handle, and it creaked open. The essence of the interior washed over me. A stale bouquet of black tea, sugared orange cookies, dried lavender, and my grandmother's mille fleurs perfume. My throat burned. I steadied myself against the velvet damask-covered wall and struggled to appear composed. "Do you smell that?" I whispered. "Old lady perfume and dust?" "Yeah, a little. We can leave if you're nervous, but I swear no one is here." I shook my head and hurriedly wiped my watery eyes. "No, show me around," I managed to utter. The house oozed opulence. Thick ruby-red rugs with dizzying geometric patterns covered the chestnut wood floors. Centered in the middle of the entryway was a grand staircase that spiraled up to the second-story landing. Ornate sconces and buttery yellow candles marked the walls. I ran my hand along the carved banister and watched the closing streaks of golden sunlight glitter down through the narrow windows. The central parlor overflowed with collectibles, built-in bookcases full of gold leaf books, decorative lamps, and miniature figurines. Shadows danced along the walls in a forlorn choreography. But despite the soaring high ceilings, the interior appeared to be suffocating itself. There was no room to breathe. "Jem, look, your favorite." Nick appeared completely unaware of the existential crisis brewing inside me as he placed the needle on a vintage Victrola and sauntered toward me. Billie Holiday's voice filled the room. "I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places." I wrapped my arms around Nick's neck, laid my head on his chest, and tried to ignore my rising apprehension. Tick, tick, tick. The second hand on the grandfather clock marked the rhythm of our movement. "I am so pleased you've arrived," a voice rang out. As the record player screeched to a stop, I froze. The known voice resonated deep within me. A gaunt, withered hand delicately placed the record needle to the side. The woman's frail body was stooped over like a wilting blossom. Spotted skin stretched tightly over her bones like sheer sheets of tissue paper. "Mrs. Danforth, I am so sorry. My wife has always wanted to tour one of the Cotuit Circle homes, and I knew she'd especially love to see yours. We didn't mean to intrude. We're going." Nick spoke hurriedly, with his head bowed down. "Nonsense, Nicholas. What a jest. You certainly know I was expecting you both. I'll make us some tea." Her voice clanged out like crystal, delicate and precise, inconsistent with her shriveled appearance. I watched her curved form stagger toward the kitchen door and felt like I was grasping at the last shreds of a dream that would soon be forgotten. I didn't know her, or did I? I began to mouth, "What the—" to Nick as he grabbed my hand and led me toward the door. The hearty voice resonated from deep within the kitchen. "Nicholas, can you see to the water faucet in the powder room again? It's no longer leaking, but I cannot seem to get the water hot." Nick shrugged and dropped my hand. "She's old and confused. Have a cup of tea and we'll go." It'll only take me a few minutes to fix the water. Do not leave me alone with her. I shut my eyes and begged. When I opened them, he was already gone. The tea kettle released a shrill squeal, and seconds later, she shuffled out. A stack of cookies and 2 porcelain cups of tea sloshing over on a delicate tray. Take a seat, love, she said sweetly, as she set the tray on the table and shakily handed me a cup. I positioned myself on the edge of the velvet amethyst couch and ran my finger along the sage ivy swirls of the teacup. I watched the steam rise, desperate to avoid eye contact. Oh dear. Looks like the roses snagged you too, she observed, as she held her hand next to mine. Along her thumb was a shiny white scar, identical to the thin red cut on mine. I winced. Please have a cookie. They are delightful with this tea. I picked up the iced orange cookie and inhaled deeply. I love orange cookies. I know, it's your favorite recipe, she replied. A trickle of sweat ran down the back of my neck. This old lady was definitely unhinged. Thank you for your kindness, but we should be leaving. It's getting late. I glanced at the clock once more. The second hand appeared frozen in time. Oh, shush. The night is young. I even pulled some books off the shelf this morning to show you. I wondered if she would find it rude if I pulled out my phone and texted Nick to hurry the hell up. She slid a stack of leather-bound books across the table and slinked so close to me that our knees touched. The proximity of her presence made me uneasy. I set the teacup and cookie back on the tray, picked up the top book, and crossed my legs away from her. So, Mrs. Danforth, what do you read? Words, 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 she smirked. I raised my eyebrows to acknowledge her reference. My mind flooded with long-forgotten quotes. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I opened the book. Oh, this is a photo album. Is this you and your family? My shoulders relaxed as I slowly turned the pages. The photos all had the same muted rust color that designated the passage of time. The images captured a variety of milestones: lake vacations, ski trips, vintage cars, graduations, and birthday parties. Smiling, happy people. Yes, dear. Long before I lived here on Cotuit Circle. Ka tu et. I love saying those words, she mused. Her unnerving remark made me shiver. I set the album on the table and stood to find Nick, but something caught my eye. The album opened to an entire page of a little girl in lavender-striped pajamas, copper-colored curls. I leaned down and flipped the pages faster and faster. The little girl appeared everywhere. Her first day of school, the day she got her ears pierced, the time she fell out of a tree and fractured her wrist. The little girl was me. The saccharine voice soured into a hoarse whisper. Let's keep pretending. The children of the forsaken. The villagers called them children of the Forsaken, those shunned to the Bear Claw Mountains, exiled from society. But the children called themselves the Watchers, for their view of the villages nestled in the valley below, and to their parents, they were merely Raya Navarium, Lilith Skyden, and Quill Weston, who in the Risen's name takes the forest path to Bearclaw, asks Quill, features twisting as a gentle frown and harsh laugh compete for dominance like wolves fighting over a kill. Lilith gives him the scolding look of a mother. Don't say that. Mother says it's a bad word. I heard that the Risen will come take your voice at night if you forget to say your prayers. Though the Risen, fallen dead brought to life by the god of death, Volterem, were more myth to faithless villagers than a poor, disease-ridden harvest. Amongst the Forsaken, the ancient gods were sacred. Quill gives an assertive nod to Raya. You were brought to the Forsaken as a child. What do you think? Are we going to make another friend? Raya's features may as well have been carved from stone, like the statues of the Risen in the underground temple below their feet. Her eyes are cast on the singularity in the distance, the cloaked figures cutting through the path against a blur of wind and snow, with the relentless endurance of a river's current. Raya was only a child when she was sent to the Forsaken. But as she grew, her past came back in fragments, like the shards of a broken clay bowl she'd accidentally dropped onto her foot trying to reach the table earlier this morning. Sometimes Raya prayed to Volterem at night for the empty contentment of forgetting, to let her past die like all things in this world. But watching the figures, she supposed that there was a certain strength to remembering and enduring that was a part of living. I remember that the nun who heard me singing and saw me floating screamed and threw a book at me. I remember crying because I was confused more than hurt. Her face falls to her woolen boots covered in snow. I remember the thin cotton blanket that I shivered through all the way up to the mountains. I don't remember my father very much, except for the fact that he lived in a very big house and never seemed to be there. Quill squints through the haze, trying to see through the chaos of the storm. I don't see a child with them. Raya climbs atop a boulder with practiced movements, testing the heel of her boots against the stone for ice patches, and peers over the edge. I think you're right. Quill crosses his arms with false bravado. Of course I am. They're coming for us, but not for the reason we think. Raya turns to each of them and asks them the same question. How old are you? Quill is 10 years old. Lilith turns 8 next week. Raya is the oldest of them, almost 11. One of them wears the white robes of a priest. They were sent to cut our throats and take our voices too. Raya abandons her perch, staggering backwards. We're not even 16. Must have been a terrible harvest. Quill starts, before cut off by an elbow blow to his side. Lilith's voice trembles, and Raya tells herself that it is Lilith's teeth chattering from the cold, while Quill merely rubs the edges of his bony ribs. I need to tell Mother. She'll know what to do. Word of the priest's arrival and rumors about another nulling ceremony to take the voices of the children spread through the small town of Bearclaw faster than an avalanche. The children are kept safely behind locked doors and shuttered windows, while townspeople brandish an assortment makeshift weapons: knives, pickaxes, woodcutters' axes, shovels, old potions, and spell books. By the time the travelers arrive, the townspeople are ready and waiting. The children have been instructed to stay inside, stay away from the windows and door. But the coziness of the fireplace is almost stifling compared to the tenuous, cold, bitten air. Lilith turns away from the window, her eyes damp with tears. A few moments ago, her mother had forced her to look her in the eyes and wrote that if she could not be strong for herself, she must be strong for others. Her father, who mostly grunted in response to anything she said, hugged her and wrote that he loved her. Only now, Lilith started to realize that she would need to be strong for her people if her mother wasn't there to lead them. Huddled in the corner, hugging her knees against her chest, Raya tries to press her body flat against the wall to steady her trembling frame. Her mother wrote mutterings about the trouble that youth these days seem to find. Then she had stuffed firelight potions in the bag across her chest, wrapped another coat around her shoulders, and strung an amulet around her neck. Raya rubbed the markings on the rabbit bone, hoping there would be enough magic in the amulet to protect both of them. Meanwhile, Quill fights the urge to sneeze, itchiness crawling up his throat, threatening to explode. Earlier that evening, his father had taken out a gleaming, enchanted sword from a cabinet and donned the knight's armor that he'd stolen off a rotting corpse in a cave. When his father gave Quill the dagger that he used for skinning game, he wrote for Quill to protect the girls. At first, Quill wanted to point out that Lilith had been practicing her blood song, and Raya was a gifted illusionist. But taking in the hard lines of his father's saw, cast against harsh torchlight, Quill understood. His father also expected him to protect himself, prove himself. We're no priests, and we mean you no harm. The woman's weary steps sink into the snow, too loud and soft, at the same time like the toll of church bells, carried by the flurries of wind. Lilith's mother uses a pierce of charcoal to write on an empty page of her spellbook. Raya flinches at the groaning wooden beams of the cabin as the wind rattles the bolted shutters. Lilith inhales a deep, shaky breath, and Quill stifles his sneeze. I apologize for our deception. Only priests or knights are allowed to travel to the mountains. Tugging down the pristine pale cowl of his cloak, the man takes a step closer. We came here to warn you that your children are in danger. Are they well? Quill's father aims the tip of sword against the man's throat. The crowd gathered in front of the gates stands unwilling, unyielding against the wind. They lurk like a massive shadow, looming over the two strangers as the sun dips below the horizon. They want to take your children's ability to speak. As if sensing their prying eyes, watching from the window, the woman turns to the them, tugging at the man's cloak. Can we see the children? Please? Lilith's mother gestures towards Quill's father. With a heavy sigh, he drops the sword to his armored side. Raya's mother walks towards the door. All three of the children duck their heads down below the window, as if caught stealing maple sweets from the table, and glance at anywhere but each other in guilty silence. None of them flinch when there's a gentle knock against the door, as they follow Raya's mother in stunned, uncertain silence. The fickle, unruly wind seems to whisper in their place. Lilith tugs her thick cloak closer around her shoulders and straightens her shoulders to seem older than she is. Raya keeps her head lowered, focused on chasing her mother's shadow in a game of tag she's been playing since she was born. Quill trudges along, wearing his father's boots that are a few sizes too large for him. Kneeling on the snow, the woman flicks back her cowl. Her eyes are focused with concern. They said you were young, but they failed to mention you weren't old enough to bleed. Her gaze softens as she glances at Lilith. I have a daughter, Pyrrha. You remind me of her. The man turns to Quill. Do you know why we are here? Lilith glances at Quill, who in turn glances at Raya, their eyes locked in contest. A contest that Raya lost. Yes, she says, forcing the truth out of her mouth, harsh as the burning cold. A few hours ago, the priests sent knights to your village. They will arrive soon. We are offering to bring you to a safe place for a while. The woman meets Lilith's mother's gaze with deference. If your parents will allow us, Lilith's mother writes, we can protect our own. Why should we trust the kindness of a villager? Then Raya's mother follows. How do we know they will be safe with you? Quill's father hesitates before adding, where will you take them? When will we be able to see them again? The rest of the crowd lift their spell books in the air, messages scrawled in crooked, furious strokes that reminded Raya of the warning signs written with animal blood and placed before the forest path. You take our voices, our magic, and now you want our children? Leave. You are not welcome here. Lilith tugs on her mother's tunic sleeve, insistent, like a furry blood moon moth drawn to a candle. They're only trying to help, "That's what the priests say," replies Quill, with an annoyed scoff. Rhea closes her eyes, trying to put up a mental fortress around her mind, blocking out the argument. She still remembered the long, tortuous walk from the church orphanage as she left the village. A man smelling faintly of bread spat on her feet. Someone wearing a silk dress called her a sorcerer, slut. When she tripped and fell on her feet, a rosy-cheeked child took the opportunity to throw rotten fruit at her back. Despite having a priest for company, Rhea knew that she was alone. But when she opens her eyes again, the memory of the villagers fade, and all Rhea sees are two people who ventured through the cold wilderness to protect 3 children they'd never met from knights. Standing alone, Rhea addresses the crowd. "I think that they've come all this way. We should at least hear what they have to say. My wife, Vea, has a sister that lives in a cottage on the other side of the sea in Whaley's Fair. Your children would be staying there. You could come visit whenever you wished, so long as you were not followed by knights." The man takes a step away from the crowd, giving them some privacy. "Whatever your choice may be, we will understand." His eyes turn far more distant than the few paces between them. We know the loss of being separated from a child, as heated conversations fade to concerned murmurs, leaving torn messages from spellbooks crumpled and discarded in the snow. The parents turn to their children. One last message. It is your choice. Rhea, Lilith, and Quill glance at each other, silently coming to an agreement. "We'll go." The villagers called them children of the Forsaken, those exiled from society and their home in the Bear Claw Mountains. But the children called themselves the Watchers for their view of what others sometimes fail to see. To those who knew them, they were merely Rhea Navarium, Lilith Skyden, and Quill Weston, the children who defied the silence of death like the Risen, the man in the lake. Since I was a child, I've feared him deeply, though I've never laid eyes upon his elusive person. I can remember vividly walking along the narrow trail that surrounded Lake Victory during the Ides of October. The water, dormant and as reflective as glass, was enraged by the fiery reds of the perishing leaves that clung desperately to the maples surrounding it. If you glanced from a distance, you'd think it was a pit of lava, scorching through the center of the earth from the leaves that already pirouetted to the ground. A magnificent blanket of gold and orange stretched invitingly along at your feet. Consequently, as the trees became more barren, the seasonal breeze squeezed between the branches, knocking together their nimble limbs. With its powerful grasp, the whooshing breath of Mother Nature would envelop all sounds within an ear's distance of man. This type of silence was cathartic. If you closed your eyes, you could become coalesced with its gentle movement, as a spider web would become accessorized against the unbeknownst skin. The random assortment of sounds stemming from birds, the splashing of fish, an acorn falling from the tree, the ominous sounds of swaying, narrow trees like a rusted seesaw, or the mercurial patter of rain echoing against the wilted leaves, producing a light bass that was rhythmically harmonious to the ear. My grandfather always mentioned this man was always present, but you had to search persistently without fear or a cluttered mind. There was always talk of a dock, though the far side of the lake was unrecognizable from the conception, with its bends and curves to and from sight. He always said, not many find this man in Lake Victory, that it takes a special kind of person to gain his trust. The man was full of wisdom, distinguished, and had the ultimate answer to life's enigmas, he claimed. That he had experienced the greatest challenges man can face. I used to circle this lake frequently as a child, climbing trees for a better view, skipping rocks to alert him of my presence, and whatever other racket I could concoct to make myself evident as far as I could muster the courage to. Of course, this came to no avail. In my mind, the imagery of this man had always changed. Some days, he would be terrifyingly tall, his limbs slender, and his eyes were always hidden underneath a low-positioned straw hat. Other days, he would have a becoming face, accentuated by a tinge of red from physical exertion. I pictured him growing corn in small patches, picking berries from wild bushes, and fishing regularly from his forsaken dock. A fire would be ablaze during his nights, where he would sit complacently, listening to the crickets and the sounds of night. As I went through high school and college, the distraction and monotony of life had guided me far away from Lake Victory, in search of material things, to chase a dream enriched by hollow rapacity. My family's vacation home had become a distant memory. I no longer needed to acquaint this man during the fall, because he no longer could fill the void inside of my heart as he would in my youth. Or so I thought. I figured that new quest, with all the goals I had set for myself to accomplish, would provide far more solace than the man in the lake. I riddled myself with distraction, so much so I was afraid to be alone with my own thoughts, praying my responsibilities and egocentric monsters that loomed behind would never catch up to my incessant steps and thoughts. However, when things that provide no internal peace reach an expulsion point, there comes the burnout. It wasn't until I was 37 that for the first time in my life, I began to feel the weight of time bearing down upon my slouched and exhausted shoulders. It was quite amazing when I returned, how the lake had never lost its luster. However, it is also true that not many know of this lake's whereabouts. Furthermore, it would be bizarre to even encounter another bystander in your journeys around its trail. It wasn't long before I started to realize that the wonderful colors that encapsulate nature never truly lose its vigor. Only the mud-made things in life itself begin to fade as your optimism and naivety of being young dissipates as you embrace the harsh realities of existence. The future remembers history in black and white, though those who lived it always can revisit the palette that painted their peaks, whether the ravishing color of their wives' eyes when they first met, the color of their first vehicle sitting, sparkling in the driveway, or his father's blue flannel shirt, always rolled up to the elbow as he returned home from work. I remember spotting the rays of the sun streaming through the naked branches, placing my hand within its warm consultation like I did as a child. My pallid flesh began to glow as an orb would, the light bending around and through my stretched fingers as I tried to ball it up and capture it within my selfish fist. The trees, though still gallant and strong, were showing signs of age then. Their bark had become brittle and fissured. The base of some of these trees had become cavernous, offering safe haven for the smaller critters. I reflected on my own appearance, with the subtle lines beginning to formulate below and beside the eyes, the random sprouts of gray hair poking through my sideburns, and the pouch of flesh that had grown dormant around my waist. I, too, was succumbing to life's greatest guarantee, and I reflected upon my mortality as I rested my hand against the withering bark in passing. The man in the lake must be growing old. It was then that again I was enlivened by the man himself as I began to intake the fresh air. Surely in my adulthood I could find this man, who must be very old himself, and not as evasive as he was many, many years before. Those creaks and snapping of branches under the light prancing of the deer would set my heart ablaze, gawking maniacally and frozen still, hoping to finally catch a glimpse of this folklore. The ground was still forgiving to my steps, still fecund from the week's rain, and my soles glided effortlessly across the discarded tapestry of leaves as they did when I was young. And through certain partitions between the blinding trees, you could catch a swooping heron, the elongated neck, saintly patience, and aloof demeanor, awaiting the perfect moment to spear its beak into unsuspecting prey, just as they had in early summers. I remember the trail was as underutilized as ever at 37, stumbling atop exposed roots and stubbing my toe against jagged rock. I had been swimming through the thickets, gently whipped by the returning force, though I continued to push further than I'd ever had as a child. It wasn't long then before that allure and optimism that guided my clairvoyance towards the man in the lake previously was becoming shrouded by the enclosing nature surrounding my steps. Briefly, I remembered pausing within a small pocket of land, like an atrium within the center of the forest, and weighed my options going forward. I concluded that maybe my grandfather made up this man in the lake, that maybe I knew this all along and held on to this anecdote like one holds on to an old shirt from his past, attached to the memories it harnessed. It was then I turned towards the trail where I had come from. Then I craned my neck towards the hazardous continuance just ahead. Something within was battling, opposing forces destined for different destinies, though I allowed my city-wrought mind to win the battle once again. I turned back towards my vehicle, leaving the man behind once again. Now, I am 79. I've raised children, paid off my mortgage, made all the money one can make to live a satisfied life. However, something was gnawing in the confines of my mind. The man in the lake. Here I was again. The trail was non-existent now, but I allowed what was left of my memory to guide me towards my former footsteps upon weakened limbs. Some of the trees now had fallen, and Lake Victory was as exposed as it ever had been, as I gingerly stepped around the detriments of my journey. In brief increments, the past would flash before my eyes, and through my childhood eyes, I was allotted the opportunity to see Lake Victory in all of its former glory. My breathing was heavy, my hands calloused as I tightly grasped my walking stick. My calves were aching tremendously, though my heart thumped with the excitement and fervency of a teen. I knew this was my last opportunity. The fall always seemed to leave me speechless. How could it be? Something that I've witnessed dozens of times still enraged my love for this very earth, just as it had the first time. It was the essence of beauty, natural, pure in all of its forms, and I was appreciative that it only climaxed for a few weeks. Things of such enchantment are usually ephemeral, undeserving of the burden of obsolescence. The woman you meet in a foreign land, gone before you awake in the morning. The feeling on a motorcycle, with your hair in the wind, barely avoiding death, and the war cry that follows, with your heart nearly shattering your rib cage. It was superior to all, because it was effortless. It was the cycle of life itself. The atrium was still present, though it had shrunken to barely enough room for an elderly man, such as myself. This time, I trudged through the webbing of branches and shrubbery, my face becoming sliced, and my hands bloodied by their sharp teeth. I could see the sun breaking through, about 20 feet ahead. This must have been where the man lived. I broke through the remaining brush, out into an open field. The purple and yellow flowers arched from their nesting spots, swallowed by the remaining green of October that survived by a water source. I looked upwards, glad to see the sun, receptive to its blanketing of my worn flesh. Then I looked towards the water once again, and there it was, the aforementioned dock. However, I was now forlorn, spotting no cabin in the woods, nor anywhere that a man could survive in such circumstances. I did not see his corn, nor his burn pit, where he spent his nights. I've spent my whole life, in retrospect, always comparing myself to the man in the lake, his humble attitude, his love for nature, his ability to acquire happiness without material things. His lore kept me grounded to reality. And now I was faced with the harsh truth that his existence was never crafted by veracity. Nor was this apotheosis one in which I dreamed many times before. I harped upon why my grandfather would speak so greatly of him, as if a friend. Why allow me to go on these wild goose chases, hoping to encounter some begrimed being, steeped in desolation? I approached the dock apprehensively, acknowledging its worn and derelict bones, the way it slouched towards the right side, and how the algae grew rampantly across its damp surface. I took a careful step and stopped, now hearing the lapping water gently clapping against the embankment, taking along with it the atrophied leaves, as a Viking would be sent off during his death. I took another step, stopping once again, surprised by the stability with a poke of my stick, and then decided upon shuffling towards the very edge. Here I stood, looking out over the lake that had held such a prized position within my heart. I looked down towards the surface of my hands, with all of the wrinkles and liver spots that come regretfully with age. Then I looked around the lake, witnessing its vitality once again. I understood that though some of the trees would tumble, that this very dock itself will eventually surrender to entropy, that the man in the lake may have been a farce, that ultimately I was eternally grateful for everything it had provided me in my life. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the brisk air searching through my lungs. As I exhaled greatly, there was a surge of enlightenment that had imbued a deep revelation just as I had opened my eyes. And it was at this moment I knew I had found the man in the lake. As I looked down, just ahead of the last portion of the dock, I saw my reflection within the still water, the white hair that whisked away with the gentlest of breezes, the thick, clouded glasses that stretched across my eyes, my hunched disposition barely holding up underneath my trembling legs. This fascinating search for a character that had lived deep within all of our souls, one stripped bare of the repressed angst and uncertainty that haunted us all outside of this mystical place. With all of its simplicity and understanding of life, that one tends to convolute upon their odyssey towards enlightenment. This was the ultimate lesson, and it took a lifetime to understand. I was the man in the lake, just as my grandpa had once been, and maybe one day you will be too.